I couldn't understand why he barked. Anyway, sorry. So, plan, subsidize, and protect industry. So that's kind of three different kinds of strategies. I mean, we will learn later on based on my article. So I wrote articles how government actually did over time for the economic development. And the most important, one of the important things that government did was instructions of Ulsan industrial complex. That's the starting of infrastructure, building infrastructure. The one of the significant roles the government should take for economic development is infrastructure, construction of infrastructure. And then Ulsan Industrial, they is starting, it's actually started. So the government not only built a lot of highway, so we built a lot of highway during the Park Chung-hee, and then based on this highway, they start this construction of Ulsan. So Ulsan, we have a lot of complex, the business complex. So we have Hyundai, we have POSCO. So we have different kinds of very significant jebels, so big conglomerates in Ulsan, and how this actually started the Park Chung-hee region. So this is the picture that Park Chung-hee went to Ulsan with Hyundai leader. So he is the first CEO of Hyundai. Of course, he died a long time ago, but he actually built the Hyundai. So if you watch very famous Korean drama, the last grandson of Chaebol. So the big conglomerate's the last grandson. If you watch that TV show, there is a Jin Yang-chul CEO. So who we motivated? It's a It's him and Samsung owner, the first Samsung owner, and him. That they kind of mixed. So when they wanted to develop the chips, semiconductor chips, it's a Samsung, and Samsung also wanted to have a car industry. It's a Samsung owner, but his characteristic is more like a Jong the CEOs of Ulsan. So people think that it's a mixture of Samsung and Hyundai leader. But anyway, so that's the how Korea developed, and that's the if you look at what's the subsidized and protection, it's a tax breaks. So they cost some tax, corporate tax. Second, tariff protections on imported goods. So when we export, we got a benefit out of it because U.S. didn't put any imported taxes from the South Korea. That's very different from what happened right now by Trump industry. And then credit subsidized, that means government actually lended the money without interest rate, without interest. That's credit subsidized. So the government provides sometimes money. So you can borrow money from the bank without interest or with low interest, or sometimes the government just give a fund to the firms for the development. It's because, well, it's, for instance, let's say we want to develop car industry. What you need most is maybe R&D costs because we have to develop cars industry, right? Then it's really costly. It's very expensive. So government actually provide this R&D cost. That's actually credit subsidy. This is what happened right now in South Korea too. Infrastructure. So we built a lot of manufacturers and road, railways, kind of things. All infrastructure. Most infrastructure were built in during the Park Chung-hee regime, and devalue the currency. So it's if we devalue the currency, so that's the thing, the least thing the government should do. But many Asian countries they adopt this strategy. Abe, you know the Japanese Abe Prime Minister, he adopted this devalued currency. South Korea did. a lot of Asian countries actually adopted this devalued currency. So the many economy scholars, they think that the government shouldn't touch on this currency rate. Currency rate was naturally or automatically shaped or established by marketism or market. But if government touches it, then the whole economy will go wrong. That's what actually many economy scholars they try to argue. But devalued currency, why? But even though these warnings, why do you think that many leaders in dictators or not Abe is not dictators, but wait, why do you think that some leaders adopt this devalued currency for what? I mean, you have to think about it, right? It's because if you devalue currency, it's good for export. So if you wanted to export more, then many countries adopt this devalue currency. So if you devalue currency, what's the good things about export? And so let's say it consumes like $100 to make this paper. Let's say I make this paper. It costs $100, and then 101. Let's say we talk about devalued currency, right? So if we convert it to dollars, it's one. It's let's say it's 101. That means it's like 80 cents, right? But if we devalue currency, so that means it's less than 80 cents. It's like it becomes 70 cents, right? If we devalue currency, then many people would buy because it's cheaper, right, in America. So it's better for export, not import. So devalued currency is will give a beneficial to the country to whom the country that adopt export-oriented policy. So one of the great example is South Korea. So devalued currency. And then we adopt export-oriented policy. So in Korean, it's a 수출 주도 정책. So you probably heard a lot of it. So export, some people like adopt import substitution policy. In many Latin America, actually, they select import substitution policy. But usually, but policy didn't do anything wrong. Usually, like how you manage, that's the most important, right? But so South Korea, not only South Korea, China did, Japan did, and a lot of Asian countries they adopt this export-oriented policy. But we have import. Let's talk about export-oriented policy. What is substitute? So what is export-oriented policy? Everything. So we had the government. They announced it's plain economy. So they announced their goal, what they wanted to export, what they wanted to produce, kind of things. So export-oriented policy means when they decide which one they will produce, how much they will produce, and how much they will export. So everything was focused on export, not on import. But import substitution industrialization is it's different from export oriented policies. So export oriented they wanted to they just think about how much they can export. But import is more like they more focus on import. That means so they think that they talk. I mean, so I'm sorry, certain things just going on. I'm sorry. So Latin America they adopt this import substitution policy, and then some India. Indian country, so we have Indian students, and they also adopt this import substitution policy. So import substitution policy is basic idea is that they want to change the consumption goods into the imported goods. That's what it's about. So, but there is so for instance, uh, so like replace. So they want to replace foreign goods with domestic production. So it's cheaper for the consumer. That's the good things about it. But export orientation policy is that they wanted to compete. They wanted to grow a certain field or certain product to export, and then that's actually many scholars think that it's better policy because it actually gives competitive advantage compared to other countries. But imported one usually fail. So well, we will have a chance to learn import substitution policy. I will talk about it later on in detail. But anyway, so at first we start with light industry. It's because we didn't have anything but cheap labor. So with cheap labor, what kind of industry we can start with is just answer is light industry. So that's why we start with light industry, and then we start plywood, wig, radio, textile. So we didn't have much natural resources. So all the natural resources, maybe the wood, right, or textile, it's easy to start with. So many African countries, when they decide to economic development, usually they start with textile. So Turkey is like that. Turkey's textile industry is pretty much advanced right now. Brazil, it's like that. If you look at the text of your clothes, then usually made in China, but many products were made by Turkey or made by Brazil, like that. It's because it's easy to start. Anyway, so that's why we focus on at first to export this plywood, wig, radio, textile. So chip industry. We started the light industry first, and later on we launched heavy and chemical industry. So in Korea, end of 1970s and early 1980s, we adopted chemical industry. So 1980s main export goods it's TV, vessel, steel, electronics. So it's better than the light industry ones, right? So 1960 labor intensive industry like a light industry. So our export goods were weeks, textile like that. But 1970s is heavy industry. So we started to export TV, steel, electronics, and from 1980s we started to knowledge-based industry. So we start to export like cars, semiconductors, like that. So we have developed like this, and then we put a lot of tariffs of imported goods. So if you look at this tariff rate, it was 40%, which is pretty high. So that means like average we put 40% of tariffs. So it was, let's say, $100 of watch, let's say, but if we put 40% of tariff, then it become 140. So it's expensive. So no one will buy, and this of course number will goes down as we developed. So the import revalorization rate has been increased over time, but it was really low, and that's number of import restriction. That means you can't not import it. This is, yeah, total number of import items. This is how many things we imported. This is restriction. So it goes up, of course. So it's like 1981. We have to import a lot of things from the foreign countries because to export, we need more parts and items. So let's say like semiconductor, it's really complicated to make, and then we import a lot of things from other countries. And then like cell phone, let's say we make cell phone, we import more than 15 countries for to combine or to make one cell phone. That's why we can't just restrict. So the total number of imported items should be increased over time. As the economy developed, the number of items should be increased. So in 1960, it was 40%, and the number of import restriction about 520, and the number of imported items was only 1,312. But it has been increased over time in 1980s. So from 1980s, we started to liberalize our economy, but it didn't really liberalize. It liberalized completely in 1990s when Kim Yong-sam became president. Here is the characteristics of this Korean economic development. So many scholars actually studies until here. Oh, we have to talk about that too. So business, the characteristic of business. So the first characteristics, because as you can see, nationalized bank, as I said, the government could select a few firms that they wanted to favor to, right? So that's why the growth of Jebel, it was unstoppable. So like Korea's economy, when we talk about Korea's economy, the first thing you come up with is Jebel, big conglomerate. So as you know, if you watch a lot of drama, there was always Jebel's son, right, or Jebel's grandson. It's come out. It's like a how should I say? It's prince. It's prince of. It's kind of prince, right? We describe him as a prince, a lot rich, handsome. You know, it's like a dream. But where this actual culture come from? It's from 1960s. The growth of Jebel, big conglomerate, and the Jebel could access low or no interest government. So that means, so many people, many scholars actually emphasize that at the time, the government has a lot of power and the business doesn't have any power because the only way to access money is through the government. Then the business should do whatever government said. So that's why business doesn't have much power. And then that's why business was delegate of state power and the principal agent of the state. That means whatever the government said, the business should follow whatever government said. So it's kind of delegate or agent by government. They cannot decide whatever they want. They cannot decide what kind of industry they want to start, but government actually can only order to them what kind of product they should produce, how much they should export. So there is a book, it's written by the CEO of Hyundai. So if you read it, you can find a lot of fun things that they say like, oh, how I succeed. The Jung Ju-young, he described like, oh, I did this for success. I did this for success. But I wanted to emphasize that if, I mean, let's say like he hold the picture, in picture nothing, there was nothing, only land, empty land, and he went abroad and he say, here this is the picture of the land. I will build a factory here, so please invest for us. That's what he said. That's what he did. But I mean, but then do you think that the other side of the business, the investor, do you think he's stupid? He's very smart too, but he must be or she must be very smart. But just looking at this picture, they decide to invest. That's very naive to argue. It's it. I mean that the other side of the investor could invest Korea at the time because they know government is behind the Hyundai. So if you read that story, of course I do not want to neglect the role of CEOs at the time. I mean they must be smart, they must be hardworking. But I can respect that. But it's not easy to say it's all their, I mean, glorious, right? It's all like government's glory at the same time. Anyway, so the power of business was very small, and another the characteristics that South Korea has was oppression of labor. So this is the pictures that how laborers work, the working environment. As you can see, like so many people 하나 둘셋넷 다 일곱 여덟 아홉 열 열하나 열두 at least 12 people in one room. So that's how they stay. So at the time many people actually were died because of overworkload. And like these days, you think that we criticize a lot of boomers, 꼰대. We criticize 꼰대s, but we should respect 꼰대s. Without their sacrifice, we couldn't build the Republic of Korea like this. So it's all their like sacrifice and their efforts. So we have to actually acknowledge what they did for us. But they work like 12 an hour, 12 hours a day. That's very normal. They work even Sunday and Saturday. There was no even Sunday for them. They even like take the day off maybe one or two times a month. That's all. So we work crazy at the time to make money. And he looks very young, right? So if you graduate like high school, not even high school, middle school, then you usually go to factory to make money. So only a few people could go to a university or college. So if your father, man, your father is maybe similar to my age, so it's not really like similar to me. So maybe if your father's age is over 60, then he must work really hard. You should respect that. Anyway, and if your father graduate college, he must be very well educated compared to what at the time. And then, but there are some labor movements, labor demonstrations, but it's only occur like it was very rare in 1960s and 70s, but it wasn't that rare from 1980s. It's because of heavy and chemical industry. So light industry characteristics, labor cannot have much power leverage because it's so easy to display. So if you wanted to quit, okay, quit. It doesn't really matter. I mean, we don't really need you. But heavy and chemical industry, you need skilled labor. That means the labor can have a leverage, power leverage, compare or against the business. So from 1980s, the laborers could have some power, but still laborers are much doesn't labor do not have much power even now, right? But but that's the operation of labor. It's really fun to see like these days we worry about like brain drain, right? So like PhD, some students got a PhD from the US and then he does or she doesn't want to get a job in Korea, but instead he wanted to go to China to get a job because they pay more. So we talk about like brain drain. So it's possible because it's not easy to replace. So like professor, they usually like spend like 11 years to get a degree, and if you're like uh, have some skills, that skill is very rare or exclusive for him or her, then it's not easy to replace. In that case, well, we have to worry about brain drain, right? So the labor could have power, but it's very rare thing. So that's this at the time it was all labor union, and assembly was totally illegal. So if you make a labor union, or if you demonstrate, then usually you go to jail. But still, there were some people who worked for labor union and assembly. So and one of the famous activist was John Taylor. He this is his picture. So he read actually the law. So according to labor law, labor should take a rest, like a certain amount of hour. Labor should get paid, like legally. But he knew that, and he wanted to. He asked for he asking for a firm, but firm didn't actually listen what he said because as I said, it's easy to replace. He used to work in Seoul textile industry, and he burned himself to let people know about labor's rights. So that's why he's one of the famous to one. So if you look at the annual working hour, this is Korea, Japan, Finland. So Japan and Korea both are categorized as a developmental state, but if you compare the working hour, it's not even comparable, even now. Okay, so we can dismiss the role of U.S. So U.S. aid Korea and Taiwan against communist aggression. So the role of U.S. we can't actually neglect that. So they provide a lot of food, rehabilitation of investment goods, and the most important thing was technology transfer. So the Korea could start semiconductor industry, 반도체 industry. It's because of the U.S. So we wanted to start a semiconductor industry, and then we asked help from the U.S. So U.S. firms decide to transfer technology for free. Well, I mean, sometimes it wasn't free, but most of them were free. So that's how we started. And then now Korea is one of the biggest country who export semiconductor industry. So it was possible because of this technological transfer. And third, military aid. So we spend crazy money for military right now, and even back then, I mean, we spent a lot of money. But so so if we calculate how much U.S. help, so 1960 it was 14% of GDP. 1961, 22.5%. It has been decreased over time, but it was the money the U.S. help was pretty high. We can't just neglect that. It's more than like 10%, right? And then we could develop like this because of education. So as I said, Korea was eager to learn education. So illiteracy rate was about 21%, and in 1960 it was 27.59%. But now territorial education became 80%. So this is crazy number. I mean, any country achieved educational level like this high. So Korea was eager to learn and role of education. So why then education matters much? Number one, technology transfer possible. So we developed from light industry, heavy and chemical industry, and knowledge-based industry. So to jump like this, we need personnel, well-educated personnel. So skilled labor. How skilled labor possible? Because people start study. That's the technology transfer possible. And whenever the government wanted to launch new industry, it could be possible because there were the personnel, workers there who educated this new industry and handle the crisis. So if you have a well-educated personnel, then it's easier to handle the crisis. And then because of education, skilled labor produced, and this skilled labor has a more power leverage against government. That's a strong labor market. So of course, if you compare the power of state, power of business, power of labor, if we compare each other among three, the most powerful must be state or business, but not a labor. But compared to the previous years, the labor market has been stronger and stronger as the the industry has been changed over time. So these days, knowledge based. So you can ask more money to the business, unless as long as if you have a skilled, and then that skill is not easy to replace. So that's the role of education. So we talk about. I mean, we will talk about this later on, but I mean, we can finish it, I think. Yeah, let's finish it. It's about like 2 hours long kind of materials, but let me finish. So, growing influence of Jebel. So, Jebel, but the relationship. So, many scholars argue that the power of state is strongest, and then business, and then labor. That's the power configurations of development state, but this has been changed over time because of Jebel. Jebel has great influence on not only South Korea but also in the world. So Jebel, they could have power. The thing, so Jebel in by 1994, 2,650 project was held in overseas, not in South Korea. So Jebel became, has more power because they started to export things to outside, and they could have a more project, or they can make money out without the help of the state. So Samsung doesn't really need government, right? Samsung can do. I mean, if Samsung decide to move to another country, I think any country will welcome Samsung. But that means Samsung has more power than the state. So how could it possible? Because they developed and they have more power. And the most important thing is they could access credit. They could access money without state. So they can borrow money directly from foreign bank. It's so easy. So you think that Samsung has a difficult time to borrow money from the international? No, not at all. If Samsung asks money, I think many bank would uh, like to lend the money to Samsung. So it was I mean, the nationalization of banking system has become lower over time, but the most important thing, they do not ask money from the state anymore. And non-regulated loans, so this actually the main cause of economic crisis in 1997 for sure. So they ask money from at the time the firms, they played with interest rate. So they borrow the money with lower interest rates, and they lended money to the poor countries like South Asian countries with high interest rates. So that's what they play with, this interest rate. But South Asian firms could not repay their money, and that's the starting point, and then it impact huge impact to the South Korean government and South Korean firms. And then this changed relationship. So relationship has changed over time. The state has more power, but later on, business has more power, and then labor also has a power. So there were a lot of labor disputes and strong labor. We had a strong labor union, and there were 7,100 labor disputes only within 2 years. For 2 years, there was very strong labor dispute, and then we had very strong labor unions. This is education one. So this is two strong labor union in Korea. Federation of Korea Trade Unions, that's peak association. So government actually made them. So it doesn't really have a power, but we have a 민주노총, Korean Confederation Trade Union. It's established by laborers, and it has a lot of power. So we have to understand the how state control the finance, how states control over business with what, and then we have to understand the configuration, power configuration among three: business, state, labor. We will learn what we while we are learning David Kong, and then also you can't neglect the role of state. So I mean, this is the Israel South Korea, so I don't want to go that deep, but here's the possible discussion. So possibility of application to others. So I want you to think about the possibility of this application strategy that Korean government adopt. Is it possible to apply to other country? And is there any cultural obstacles to develop? So like not only I'm asking for South Korea but also other countries too. And free rider, who are the free rider? And was it possible to achieve economic growth in democracy? That's the four questions that I wanted to ask. If we had a class, not online, but then we would discuss. But since it's online, I'll leave it here. But anyway, today is October 6th. It's is it 추석? Today is 추석? I think today is 추석, right? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, today is 추석. Oh, I didn't know. Oh, anyway, so happy 추석, and I'll see you on 10th. See you.